My friends, I want to talk to you today about something vital, a profound lesson we can learn from the world around us. Imagine, if you will, a group or an organization, perhaps in the political arena, so confident in its own power that it fails to recognize the significant challenges growing from within. On one side of our nation, we see Zohran Mamdani, a rising figure in New York politics, whose campaign is currently facing considerable difficulties under the weight of scandals, revelations, and questions about foreign donations. And on the other, Senator Chuck Schumer in Washington is engaging in a strategy that risks the credibility of his entire party, and it seems to be unraveling faster than anyone anticipated. Both of these situations are unfolding simultaneously, and they are connected not by mere coincidence, but by a deeper cause. You see, when a movement starts to mistake chaos for strategy, when ideology becomes louder than sound judgment, the challenges often don't come from the outside. They emerge from within. What we're witnessing right now isn't merely political missteps. It's a breakdown in how systems operate, consuming public confidence at an alarming rate without a clear strategy for a stable future. So let's prayerfully and thoughtfully break down how what some might call Mr. Mamdani's panic and Senator Schumer's desperate gamble, in a sense, illuminate a common challenge of self-inflicted difficulties. Now, I want you to think about something for a moment. Have you ever seen a machine, perhaps an old car engine, or even a simple coffee maker, begin to overheat because no one checked the temperature gauge? The warning signs were there, the steam, the smell, the noise, but they were overlooked, and eventually, the whole thing just gave out. That, my friends, is a powerful analogy for what's happening right now in American politics, and specifically within the Democratic Party. We see two crises, spanning two coasts, yet sharing one core problem, a reluctance to truly listen to reality. Let's start with the big picture. We're now more than a month into a government shutdown, and at the same time, New York City is just days away from electing a new mayor. And the front runner, a young Democratic socialist named Zohran Mamdani, is suddenly experiencing a significant downturn. His poll numbers are dropping, his credibility has been challenged, and it seems the more he speaks, the more difficult the situation becomes. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Senator Chuck Schumer apparently thought he could use the shutdown as leverage, a bargaining chip to push through substantial spending bills, some of which are tied to health care for people who are not even citizens. But here's the thing, according to recent polling, around 2/3 of Americans are attributing this challenging situation to the Democrats, not the Republicans. So, you have one leader attempting to navigate the nation with a shutdown, and another striving to offer expansive promises to voters in one of America's largest cities. And both of them are encountering significant public setbacks, quite dramatically. And the reason for these difficulties is the same reason any complex system faces challenges, a failure to heed vital feedback. When systems face challenges, they do so in predictable ways. When feedback is overlooked, things can unravel. That's not just politics. That's a universal principle at work, akin to the laws of nature that govern everything. So let's start where the complexities began. Zohran Mamdani wasn't just another candidate. He was envisioned as the future, young, energetic, a self-described democratic socialist with grand ideas and even grander promises. Free childcare for everyone, free buses, government-run grocery stores, a complete transformation of New York into what he imagined as a progressive paradise. For months, he led the race by double digits. His supporters were enthusiastic, the media was intrigued, and even skeptics acknowledged his momentum. But then, as often happens when someone builds a campaign on emotion rather than a solid foundation of evidence, the cracks started to show. First came the story about his aunt. Zohran Mamdani had repeatedly told audiences about how his aunt stopped riding the New York City subway after September 11th, 2001. Why? Because he claimed she wore a hijab, and the wave of Islamophobia in the city made her feel unsafe. It was a powerful, personal, emotional story, the kind of narrative that connects with people on a deep level. And for a while, no one questioned it. But here's the truth about stories in our digital age. They leave trails. And when journalists started checking the facts, the story proved to be untrue. It turns out Zohran Mamdani's aunt wasn't even in New York City during or after 9/11. She was living in Tanzania, halfway around the world. When confronted, Mr. Mamdani tried to clarify, suggesting, well, maybe it wasn't his aunt. Maybe it was his father's distant cousin. But guess what? Investigators found that person too, also in Tanzania at the time. So the story, the emotional centerpiece of his campaign's appeal to marginalized communities, was shown to be entirely inaccurate. Now, I want you to think about what that does to trust, because trust isn't just a feeling, my friends. It's a profound assessment. Every time someone shares something with you, your mind is running a background process. Does this make sense? Does it align with what I know? Can I rely on this person? And when the answer comes back, no, it doesn't just affect that one story. It touches everything. If a person misrepresented one aspect, questions arise about the accuracy of other claims. And that's where the second challenge arose. Reports surfaced that Zoran Mamdani's campaign had accepted nearly 13,000 in foreign donations that were not permitted by law. Now, let me be clear about what that means. In the United States, only citizens or permanent legal residents can donate to political campaigns. That's federal law. It's not a guideline or a suggestion. It is the rule. And Mr. Mamdani's campaign had reportedly taken money from over 170 contributors who lived outside the country. Some of those donations were returned once the story broke, but as of mid-October, nearly 90 foreign donations totaling over 7,000 still hadn't been refunded. His opponents immediately called for an investigation, and whether or not anything comes of that, the trust was significantly impacted. Because here's the thing, voters don't need to wait for a conviction to lose confidence. They just need to observe a pattern: misrepresenting family history, accepting funds not permitted by law, not addressing it quickly. That establishes a pattern. And such patterns can significantly undermine a campaign's viability. The latest polling shows his lead shrinking dramatically. He's down to around 40% support. His main opponent, former Governor Andrew Cuomo, has surged to the mid-30s. That's a 7-point gap with a margin of error around 3 points. In other words, this race, which was once thought to be a clear victory, is now competitive. And more importantly, Mr. Mamdani's momentum has completely stalled. The energy has shifted, the narrative has changed, and ironically, it's Mr. Cuomo, of all people, who's gaining ground. But as Zoran Mamdani faced these difficulties, the ripple effects started hitting the rest of his party. Because this isn't just about one candidate in one city, it's about what that candidate represents. Mr. Mamdani was the fresh face, the bold vision, the next generation of progressive leadership. And if he struggles to keep his story straight or follow basic campaign finance law, what does that communicate about the movement he represents? Let me ask you this. Have you ever watched someone dig themselves deeper into a hole by trying to explain their way out of an untruth? It can be painful to watch, and it's a bit like what happened here. Mr. Mamdani didn't just get caught in a misrepresentation. He got caught in the subsequent explanations, and then in the explanations of those explanations. At a certain point, it's not about the original mistake anymore. It raises serious questions about judgment and fitness for leadership. Now, here's where things get interesting from a systems perspective. If you're building a movement on emotion instead of integrity, the practical realities eventually catch up. And what I mean by that is this: emotions are powerful, but they can also be unstable. They spike fast and can diminish quickly. Integrity, on the other hand, is a slow build. It might not always make headlines, but it's what holds a structure together under pressure. Mr. Mamdani built his campaign on emotional appeals: tax the rich, free everything, fight this system. But perhaps he didn't build the foundation with enough practical foresight. And when the pressure came, when people started asking, okay, but is any of this truly viable? Can you actually deliver? Are you even following the rules? The whole thing started to face considerable challenges. And just as Mr. Mamdani's situation was challenging locally, Senator Schumer's strategy at the federal level was about to experience significant national consequences. We're now in the 4th or 5th week of a government shutdown. The exact count doesn't matter as much as the trend. And the trend is this: the longer it continues, the more difficult it appears for those who initiated it. In this case, that's the Democrats. Now, let me be fair here. Shutdowns are always complicated. Both sides usually share some blame. But in this case, the polling is quite clear. Around 2/3 of Americans across the political spectrum are pointing the finger at the Democrats. And the reason is straightforward. They are the ones who refused to pass a budget unless it included significant spending increases for programs that many people do not fully endorse. Specifically, we're talking about extending healthcare subsidies to people who entered the country illegally. Now, whether you think that's compassionate policy or unwise fiscal choices, the economic reality is the same. It creates a substantial financial incentive. States that accept this money can balance their budgets. States that don't will struggle. And for places like New York and California, which are already deep in debt, this isn't just helpful, it's seen as essential. Without that federal money, those states could be facing serious budget crises, possibly even bankruptcy. And while Senator Schumer was facing challenges, someone else stepped into the conversation with profound clarity, not necessarily as a politician, but as someone who understands systems and incentives for a living. Joel Osteen, the pastor, television preacher, and businessman, often encourages us to look at the underlying incentives and systems at play. The conversation centered around a simple question: why is this shutdown happening? And the answer, when you strip away the political rhetoric, is this: because if the funding gets cut, millions of people who came here expecting benefits might leave. And if they leave, certain states will lose potential voters. And if those states lose voters, one political party could face a significant challenge to its power. Now, I'm not telling you how to feel about that. I'm just walking you through the logic. If you create a financial incentive for people to come to a place, they will come. If you remove that incentive, they will often seek other opportunities. That's not just politics, that's economics. And the reason the shutdown has dragged on for so long is because the stakes for certain lawmakers are, as they see it, existential. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you own a business and you've been paying people to stand in your store, not to buy anything, just to make the place look busy. You're hoping that the appearance of activity will attract real customers, but it's costing you a fortune. And eventually someone asks, why are we doing this? And you realize you don't have a good answer, except that if you stop, the store will look empty, and that's embarrassing. So you keep paying even though it's unsustainable, even though everyone can see it's not working. In a similar way, we might observe this dynamic playing out. There's an effort through federal funds to create the appearance of support, but the cost is astronomical. And the minute the funding stops, the whole thing faces significant challenges. So Senator Schumer's strategy isn't really just about healthcare. It seems to be about maintaining a system that, for some, artificially props up his party's electoral prospects in key states. And the shutdown is seen as a desperate attempt to keep that system alive. But as the polling shows, reality has a way of cutting through spin. And right now, the truth of the situation is becoming undeniably clear. Think about it this way. When incentives encourage practices that don't produce true value, those practices tend to multiply. That's not a political statement, that's a systems observation. If you encourage behavior that doesn't create genuine value, you often get more of that behavior. And eventually, you may run out of resources to sustain it. The question isn't whether the system will face challenges. The question is when and how much impact it has on the way down. Now, here's where this connects back to Zohran Mamdani, because what he's promising in New York City today is essentially a similar model on a local scale. He wants to raise somewhere between $8 and $10 billion a year through new taxes, and then spend it on universal programs, free childcare, free buses, government-run grocery stores, you name it. And to pay for all of this, he says he'll just tax the rich, raise the corporate tax rate by about 5 percentage points, add a 2% surcharge on income over $1 million. Simple, right? Except it's not simple at all, because the financial projections and underlying assumptions present considerable challenges. Let me explain. Right now, New York City already has some of the highest taxes in the country. When you combine state and local income taxes, the top earners in the city are paying around 58% on top of their federal taxes. That's higher than almost anywhere else in America. And Mr. Mamdani wants to push that to 17%. Now, if you're someone making $1 million a year or more and you're already paying 15% in state and local taxes, what do you do when that jumps to 17%? Especially when you can move 20 miles away to Connecticut or 1,000 miles south to Florida and pay 0 state income tax. You often choose to leave. That's what you do. And that's what economists have been trying to communicate to anyone who will listen. The top 1% of taxpayers in New York City, somewhere between 30 and 40,000 people, currently pay around 40% of the city's income tax revenue. If Mr. Mamdani's plan goes through, that dependency would jump to over 60%. So you'd have the entire city budget resting on the shoulders of a tiny group of highly mobile, highly motivated people who could solve their problem by simply relocating. This is what economists call catastrophic concentration risk. You're putting all your eggs in one basket. And that basket, my friends, has legs. it can walk away. And when it does, the whole system faces profound challenges. Not slowly, not gradually, but often all at once. But here's what's even more troubling. It seems Mr. Mamdani fundamentally misunderstands how marginal tax rates work. When you raise the top marginal rate, you're not raising taxes on all income. You're raising taxes only on income above a certain threshold. So the revenue projections his campaign is putting out, they appear wildly optimistic. Some independent analysts estimate he'd raise less than half of what he's claiming, which means either the programs don't get funded or the city goes into massive debt, or both. And this is where we see the same pattern that's playing out at the federal level, a preference for a certain ideology perhaps overshadowing careful economic analysis, grand promises over careful planning, and emotion over empirical evidence. Let me ask you something. Have you ever known someone who made a big financial decision based purely on how they wanted things to be, rather than how things actually were? Maybe they bought a house they couldn't afford because they were sure they'd get a raise, or they started a business without checking if there was actually demand for what they were selling. It feels good in the moment. It's exciting, it's bold. But when reality shows up, and it always does, the consequences can be challenging. That's what's happening here. Mr. Mamdani is selling a vision, and visions are powerful, but visions without a solid foundation are simply fantasies. And you can't run a city of 8 million people on fantasy. Now, the reason this matters beyond just one election in one city is because it's a symptom of a much larger principle. When leadership becomes so deeply invested in an ideology that it separates them from vital feedback, reality finds a way in, usually all at once. And what we're seeing with both Mr. Mamdani and Senator Schumer is that exact dynamic. They've perhaps insulated themselves from feedback. They've surrounded themselves with people who agree with them, who tell them what they want to hear, who reinforce the narrative, and as a result, they may have lost touch with the everyday realities on the ground. The polls are feedback. The challenges are feedback. The shrinking leads are feedback. The fact that 2/3 of Americans attribute blame to your party for a shutdown, that's feedback. But if you're not listening, if you're too invested in the story you've been telling yourself, then all that feedback just becomes noise. And eventually the noise becomes a wave, and the wave washes everything away. Here's what I find fascinating from a systems perspective. Both of these situations, Mr. Mamdani's difficulties and Senator Schumer's strategy, are examples of the same kind of challenge. They're feedback challenges. In engineering, we talk about feedback loops all the time. A good system monitors itself. It checks its temperature, its pressure, its output. And when something starts to drift out of range, the system corrects. It adjusts. That's stability. But when you disable the feedback loop, when you ignore the sensors, the system doesn't gradually decline. It goes into an uncontrolled path. And an uncontrolled path often ends the same way, with a significant breakdown. Political systems work the same way. The feedback comes from voters, from polls, from media coverage, from town halls, from various signals that tell you whether your strategy is working. And when you ignore those signals because they don't fit your model, you're disabling the feedback loop. You're flying blind, and at some point you hit the ground. Now let's zoom out even further, because this isn't just about two politicians making choices. This is about a political party at a crossroads. The Democratic Party right now is facing what some might call an existential identity crisis. On one side, you have the progressive wing, young, energetic, motivated by grand ideas and bold promises. They want to transform the system. They want to tax the rich, expand government, provide universal services, and they have a lot of passion. On the other side, you have the pragmatic wing, often older, more cautious, focused on winning elections and holding power. They want incremental change, coalition building, compromise. And right now, those two wings appear to be pulling in opposite directions. Mr. Mamdani represents the spirit of the first wing. Senator Schumer represents the second. And both of them are encountering difficulties. Which raises the question, if neither approach is yielding the desired results, what does? Let me share something with you. There's a concept from ancient philosophy, from Aristotle and Plato, about what makes a society stable. They figured out over 2,000 years ago that you can't have a functioning democracy or even a functioning republic unless the people in that society share a common sense of culture, identity, and investment. You need cohesion. You need people to feel like they're part of the same project, working toward the same goals, bound by the same values. When you lose that, when you have hundreds of different groups all pulling in different directions, all competing for resources, all defining success differently, the system begins to fray. It doesn't matter how good your policies are. It doesn't matter how smart your leaders are. The foundation cracks and everything built on it starts to crumble. And that's what we're seeing right now, not just in New York, not just in Washington, but across the country. Many states are experiencing population shifts. New York, California, Illinois, they're all seeing residents leave, which means they're potentially losing congressional seats, losing electoral votes, and ultimately losing influence. And the more they double down on policies that seem to drive people away, the faster the challenges intensify. It's a feedback loop, but instead of correcting, they're accelerating. Instead of asking, why are people leaving? What are we doing differently? They're asking, how do we get more federal money to make up for the lost tax base? That's not a sustainable solution, my friends. That's a temporary patch. And patches only work for so long. Here's the truth. States compete. Cities compete. They compete for residents, for businesses, for talent, for capital. And if you make your state or city uncompetitive, people will often choose to leave. They move to places with lower taxes, better services, more opportunity, safer streets, better schools. That's human nature. And no amount of ideology can override human nature. You can try. People have tried for centuries, and it always ends the same way. So when Governor Kathy Hochul, the Democratic governor of New York, goes on television and essentially says, look, if Zohran Mamdani actually tries to do what he's promising, we're going to see a mass exodus like we've never seen before. She's not being disloyal. She's being realistic. She's acknowledging the feedback. She's saying, this doesn't work. The math doesn't work. The incentives don't work. And if we go down this road, we could cause significant damage to the state. And the fact that she had to say that publicly about a candidate from her own party in one of the largest cities in the country tells you everything you need to know about where things stand right now. Let me give you one more analogy, and then I'll bring this all together. Imagine you're running that company I mentioned earlier, and your product isn't selling. The feedback is clear. Customers don't want it. So you have two options. Option one, listen to the feedback, redesign the product, and give customers something they actually want. Option two, ignore the feedback, double down on your original design, and spend more money on marketing to convince people they're wrong. Which option works? Obviously, option one. But which option requires more humility? Also, option one, because option one means admitting you might have been mistaken. It means changing course. It means putting results over ego. Right now, it appears that in some ways, the Democratic Party is choosing option two. They're doubling down. They're spending more. They're marketing harder, but the product isn't improving and the customers are walking away. Zohran Mamdani's challenges and Senator Schumer's strategy are both symptoms of the same core issue, a hesitation to adapt, to truly listen, and to fully embrace reality's feedback. Reality, my friends, operates on its own terms. It doesn't yield to ideology or intention alone. It ultimately responds to outcomes. And when the outcomes don't match the promises, people notice. They lose trust. And once trust is gone, it's incredibly hard to get back. So what happens next? Well, we'll know more in the upcoming days. If a Zohran Mamdani faces defeat, or even if he barely wins, that sends a signal. It tells the progressive wing of the party that their approach might not be as universally popular as they thought, even in parts of the country that lean heavily in their direction. If Senator Schumer ends the shutdown right after the elections, that also sends a signal. It tells everyone that this was never really about principle. It was about timing. It was about appearances. And my friends, people remember that kind of thing. But here's the bigger question. Is the Democratic Party capable of reinvention? Or are we watching the beginning of a prolonged period of challenge? Because history is full of political movements that became so attached to their ideology that they stopped being able to adapt. And once that happens, once a movement becomes rigid, it becomes brittle. And brittle things, my friends, tend to break. I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody does. But I do know this. Reality always wins. Reality doesn't need your permission to exist. It doesn't need your approval. It simply is. And the faster you align yourself with truth and practical wisdom, the better your outcomes will become. The longer you resist it, the harder the correction will be when it finally comes. So here's what I'd encourage you to do. Pay attention, not just to the headlines, but to the underlying patterns. Ask yourself, what are the true incentives here? What does the feedback truly say? What happens if this policy actually gets implemented? Don't just react emotionally. Think systematically, because the same principles that govern engineering, or business, or physics, they also govern politics. Feedback loops, incentive structures, concentration risk, adaptation. These aren't abstract concepts. They're powerful tools for understanding how the world actually works. And if enough people start thinking this way, start asking the right questions, start demanding leaders who align with reality instead of fighting it, then maybe, just maybe, we can avoid the most challenging scenarios. Maybe we can correct before a major crash. Maybe we can rebuild before a total collapse. But that requires awareness, not outrage. It requires unity, not tribalism. It requires clear-eyed, honest awareness of what's actually happening and why, rather than blind loyalty to a team or a party or an ideology. So if you want to stay ahead of the curve, if you want to understand the mechanics behind the headlines and not just react to them, make sure you're connected to sources that help you think critically. Because we're going to keep following these stories. We're going to keep breaking down the systems. We're going to keep asking the questions that truly matter. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think happens next. Does Zohran Mamdani pull off a win despite everything? Or does this become a cautionary tale? Does Senator Schumer's strategy pay off? Or does it accelerate his party's challenges? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts, because you've been watching this stuff unfold just like I have. And as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for thinking critically. Thank you for engaging with these ideas instead of just consuming them. Because awareness, not outrage, is how real lasting change begins. That's how we build a future that actually works, instead of one that just sounds good in a speech. I'll see you in the next one, and remember, God is good.